Welcome to this second lecture of the second week. This lecture would be related to the development of poetry in pre-Islamic Arabia, which is known as Ash'ar al-Jahili. The pre-Islamic poetry is also known as Jahiliya poetry. Pre-Islamic, that is the Jahiliya poetry. In historical parlances, the time frame that could be found in accordance to the historical records, the proofs, historical proofs, the text we find, the data, the actual data that is available, it ranges between 540 to 620 Christian era. So this phase represents to us the poetic legacy of Arabia, known as pre-Islamic Arabia. There are certain genres or the motifs in this poetry. This poetry that happened to be in classical Arabic, that is Al-Lugha al-Arabiya al-Fusha. It had central genres and motifs like lamentation before the ruins of the camps, al-wuquf wal-buka ala al-atlal, erotic prelude, nasib, description of poet's journey, rahil, description of animals and nature, wasf al-tabi'a, panegyric, madih, self-exaltation, fakhr, invectives, hija, and eulogies, that is irsa, among others. So these are the primary genre motifs related to the pre-Islamic Arabic poetry. It has been documented by several European scholars alongside numerous Arab sources. Charles Lyell, 1845 to 1920, his translation of 8th century Mufaddaliyat done in 1918 is a source in European languages. The most significant segment of Arabic poetry before Islam is represented by muallaqat. Muallaqat has been written uh, about in Arabic extensively as well as in European languages. In European languages, we have A.J. Arbery in his translation of Muallaqat published in 1957. It contains a wider sampling of the earliest Arabic poetry. Second to Al-Muallaqat is the Sa'alik poems, chiefly represented by Lamiatul Arab by Shanfara al-Azdi. The Muallaqat or the suspended odes or the hanging poems is a group of 7 long poems collected in 8th century. It may have been collected by Hamad ibn Rawiya. Why it may have been collected by Hamad ibn Rawiya? Because before the advent of Islam, Arabs had no institutional codes of reading and writing by and large. So, if to use the modern terminology, the literacy rate was not prevalent, it was not something uh, substantial among the Arabians. Although we find that unlike the Christians and the Jews who were more literate than the Arabian peoples, a vast majority of Arabian tribes, they didn't know how to read or write. So they were the Bedouins peoples, nurtured by nature, tutored by nature, trained by nature in their daily livelihood and daily activities. The Mufaddaliyat, the examinations of Mufaddal, a group of 126 poems collected by Al-Mufaddal al-Dabbi in 18th century. It has again been translated into European languages. The Jamharatu Ash'ar al-Arab, the gathering of the Arabs verses collected between the 8th century and 10th centuries by Abu Zaid al-Qarashi, Al-Asma'iyat by Al-Asma'i, Kitab al-Hamasa, uh, uh, an anthology of 884 Arabic poems compiled in the 9th century by Abu Tammam, the celebrated poet Abu Tammam. These are the primary sources of the pre-Islamic poetry that we have now with us. If you just look at the legacy, you will be finding that now all the anthologies of the Ashab al-Mu'allaqat will be having at our disposal. Besides anthologies of some other poets who are not included in this category, there were the poets, the vagabond poets, الصعاليك, شعراء الصعاليك. فأمامنا الآن مجموعات عدة للشعر الجاهلي، الشعر الذي كان قبل الإسلام. هذا الشعر متمثل في المدونات الشعرية التي كانت مبنية على المفضليات وجمهرة أشعار العرب والأسماعيات وكتب الحماسة. في مقدمتها كتاب حماسة أبي تمام. يعني ومعروف أن هذه الكتب أصبحت مترجمة إلى بعض هذه الكتب أصبحت مترجمة إلى اللغات الأوروبية خاصة الإنجليزية وأيضا غيرها. فهذا في الحقيقة يعطينا يؤثر لنا هذا التراث الجاهلي الهام. With this we find a very significant chunk of the poetic legacy of Arabia before Islam, especially in the form of mu'allaqat and the Shi'r al-Sa'alik alongside other compendiums. The poet yielded very significant place in Arabian society. الشاعر كان في الحقيقة يحظى بمكانة عظيمة في المجتمع الجاهلي. We have this quotation from Ibn Rashiq al-Qairwani. He says, when there appeared a poet in a family of the Arabs, the other tribes round about would gather together to that family and wish them joy of their good luck. Feasts would be got ready. The women of the tribe would join together in bands, playing upon lutes as they were wont to do at bridals, and the men and boys would congratulate one another. For a poet was a defense to the honor of them all, a weapon to ward off insult from their good name, and a means of perpetuating their glorious deeds and of establishing their fame forever. And they used not to wish one another joy, but for three things: the birth of a boy, the coming to light of a poet, and the birth of a noble mare. فإذا نبغ في القبيلة شاعر أتت القبائل فهنأتها وصنعت الأطعمة، واجتمع النساء يلعبن بالمظاهر كما يصنعن في الأعراس، ويتباشر الرجال والولدان، لأنه حماية لأعراضهم وذب عن أحسابهم وتخليد لمآثرهم، وكانوا لا يهنئون إلا بغلام يولد أو شاعر ينبغ أو فرس تنتج. How this legacy was transmitted, transmission and the questions of authenticity. The pre-Islamic Arab society was not founded on literacy or the sources of literacy or anything that is related to the legacy of knowledge. So they were majority of them. They were the Bedouin peoples with no access to the means of reading and writing. But the oral traditions were there. They had the very powerful oral tradition, and these oral traditions were inherited, were transmitted from one generation to another. إن العرب في الحقيقة كانوا يتمتعون بذاكرة قومية كبيرة عظيمة قوية جدا. فهم كانوا في الحقيقة يتوارثون هذا التراث الفكري، التراث الشعري. فالشعر انتقل من جيل إلى جيل، انتقل من جيل إلى جيل، على أننا لا نجد هناك يعني أي مشهد يؤرخ للكتابة مثلا، أو الاحتفاظ بالتراث عبر وسائل هي معروفة في تاريخ المتأخر أو في المراحل المتأخرة من التاريخ. فكانوا يعتمدون على الذاكرة، ولكن بعد حين هذا التراث انتقل من الذاكرة إلى الأجيال الأخرى، وهذه الأجيال الأخرى في الحقيقة حولتها إلى مرحلة أخرى. في هذه المرحلة نجد هذه الذاكرة مدونة بين دفتين. After some time we find that they were the رواة, the narrators like حماد الراوية, خلف الأحمر, أبو عمرو بن العلا, الأصمعي, المفضل الضبي. They were the very well-known narrators, الرواة, رواة الشعر. Why رواة الشعر? Because this word that is ravi, plural of which is ruwat, is common in Muslim sciences. We have the ruwat al-hadith, we have the ruwat al-shi'r, we have the ruwat al-adab, we have the ruwat al-tarikh. So this narration is might be varying from one discipline to another. We'll be having the narrators. We do have the narrators, a very significant number of narrators, generations of narrators related to hadith literature, and also narration related to history. So here narration is confined to adab, that is literature, share. So حماد الرابية, خلف الأحمر, أبو عمرو بن العلا, خلف الأحمر, أبو عمرو بن العلا, الأصمعي, المفضل الضبي are the foremost narrators. There has been a point of deliberation, a difference regarding the authenticity. Like there were some generations of the oral transmission. So actually the things started to be codified, or the marhala of tadween, or codification, collection and codification. It started later, in the later days of Islam. That is in the later days of the Umayyad period, not the first days of the Umayyad period. So it didn't happen in the early Islamic period. Rather, it happened in the second epoch in the history of Islam, that is the Umayyad period. So there seems to be a gap of say 200 300 years. So here the question is again how we can ascertain that this legacy is the legacy represents the reality, how it could be authenticated. There have been some doubts by the Europeans, the Orientalists, chiefly by D.S. Margulies, seconded by Taha Hussein among the Arab critics. Taha Hussein, especially in his book that is Ashyar al-Jahili, who casted some serious doubts about the authenticity of some chunks of pre-Islamic poetry. We find similar views, although limited to only very, very smaller chunks, smaller sections of pre-Islamic poetry. These views are attributed to Ibn Salam al-Jamahi in his book that is Tabqat of Fuhul Shura, Classes of the Champion Poets. So Margulis, in his article that is the Origins of Arabic Poetry, published in Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society, and Taha Hussein is pre-Islamic poetry, Ashyar al-Jahili. And before them, Ibn Salam al-Jamahi in Tabqat of Fuhul Shura have echoed this. There are some doubts related to this point. We have a large number of poets in different phases of pre-Islamic Arabia. In the early period, we have Mahd al-Adiyah, Ufaira bint Ubad al-Nawar, الجمالك بنت ابن فهم لقيط بن يعمر الأيادي جزيمة الأبرش العنبر بن عمرو ابن جزام ابن حزام الكلبي الأفوى الأودي عمرو بن قميئة معاوية بن بكر ابن حبتر مبدع ابن هرم يعرب ابن قحطان. These are the names related to the very early period. We don't have much traces of poetic contributions attributed to them. Some fragments have been recorded by historians in their books. The Ashab al-Muallaqat are Amr ibn Kulthum, Abid ibn al-Abras, النابغة الزبياني الحارث بن حلزة اليشكري العاشة إمر القيس طرف ابن العبد زهير بن أبي سلمة المزني عنتر بن الشداد العبسي and Labid ibn Rabi'a. Regarding Labid ibn Rabi'a, the thing is that which must be kept in mind that he is the first and the only, he is the only among the Jahiliyyah poets, Ashab Muallaqat, who had embarrassed Islam, who found Islam and embarrassed Islam. Hence, sometimes he is not regarded among the Muallaqat poets. Why? Because although he was born in Jahiliyyah, but since he accepted Islam, embarrassed Islam, and composed or didn't compose much of poetry, that's why he's not regarded among Ashab Muallaqat. Those who say no, he is among the Ashab Muallaqat, he says that, well, he accepted Islam, he embraced Islam, but he didn't compose except one line, a single line of poetry after he became a Muslim. That is, ألا كل شيء ما خلا الله باطل وكل نعيم لا محالة زائل. So with the exception of this single line, we don't find anything contributed by him after Islam. We have the Mukhadram. Mukhadram are the poets who found Jahiliyyah and also Islam. Among them we find Umayma bint Abd al-Muttalib, Hind bint Utba, Ka'b ibn Zuhair, Al-Khansa, Hasad ibn Thabit, Al-Ashab ibn Rumayla, Al-Tamimi, Al-Hutay'a, Barra bint Abd al-Muttalib, Abdah ibn الطبيب أبو ذؤيب الهذلي حريث بن مخفض التميمي الكميت بن معروف الأسدي أكثم بن صيفي التميمي أرطاءات الفزاري عاصم بن خليفة الضبي مالك بن عوف النصري نافع بن الأسود نهشل ابن حري نهشل. This noun has to be put over here. نهشل ابن حري أبو قيس ابن الأسلت أبو محجن الثقفي عمرو بن معدي كرب عاتكة بنت زيد النابغة الجعدي قص بن ساعدة سراقة بن مالك زيد بن عمرو بن نفيل النابغة الحارثي النابغة اليربوعي عمرو بن براقة يزيد بن قيس الأرحب يزيد الخير أو زيد الخيل ابن بقيلة. So these are the other Mukhadram poets. Sometimes we find among the historians, the historians who classify the poets, pre-Islamic poets, in accordance to theological lines based on religion. So among the Jews and Christians, we have Samuel, Uthman ibn Huwairis, Sa'iyya al-Huwaidi, al-Yahudi, Abu al-Zayyal al-Yahudi, Abu Hamza al-Yahudi, Ka'b al-Ashraf, الربيع بن عبد الحقيق، حاتم الطائي، عدي بن زيد العبادي، القعقاع بن شبس اليهودي، سارة القرظية، شريح بن عمران، سعية بن العريز، أبو عفك اليهودي، كعب بن الأشرف، عروة بن الورد. So these are the poets related to belonging to Judaism and Christianity. We have a group of poets known as the vagabonds, Sa'alik. They were the poets who were actually the wanderers, the vagabonds. Sometimes they were simply cast off the society, driven out of society, owing to several reasons, several factors. Sometimes there were some petty crimes, sometimes there were some crimes related to honor. And sometimes there were some banishments as a sort of punishment by society. So they lived in deserts or in other places of the society. So we have عروة بن الوردة، الشنفراء الأزدي، السليك بن السلكة، تأبط الشرة، أبو خراش الهزلي، حاجز بن عوف الأزدي، صخر الغيال، قطيلس العسر البقعمي، الحارس بن ظالم المري، مرة بن خليف الفهمي، قيس بن الحدادية الخزاعي. Besides, we have a large number of poetesses like آمنة بنت عطيبة، أميمة العبشمية، أمامة العدوانية، أم الأغر بنت ربيعة التغلبية، الفارعة بنت شداد، جليلة بنت مرة، خالدة بنت هاشم، صفية بنت ثعلبة الشيبانية، and also ليلى العفيفة، هند بنت أسد الضبابية، هند بنت النعمان، ليلى بنت المهلهل، هند بنت الخس، هند بنت عامر الإسلامي، طماطر بنت الشريد، أم جميل، and many others we have. These are the names we find in the books of history, enumerating the poets and their contributions, citing sometimes a few lines, and some of them, of course, having the anthologies or ad-dawawin. So, with this, we'll be having some examples of the pre-Islamic poetry. This is an example of the Qasida of Imr al-Qais, the famous Qasida of Imr al-Qais, قِفَ نَبْكِ مِنْ ذِكْرَى حَبِيبٍ وَمَنْزِلِ بِسِقْطِ اللِّوَى بَيْنَ الدَّخُولِ فَحُمَلِ. With the English translation is, stop, O my two friends, let's weep, remembering our beloved and her abode situated in the edges of the sandy desert between Dakhul and Humal. فتوضح فالمقراط لم يعفر اسمها لما نسجتها من جنوب وشمال. And between Tudith and Miqrat, whose traces have not been obliterated due to the blowing of the south wind and the north wind. So this is the example of pre-Islamic poetry. We'll be having another example of pre-Islamic poetry represented by Lamet al-Arab by Shanfara al-Azdi, who was a vagabond poet. أقيموا بني أمي صدور مطيعكم فإني إلى قوم سواكم لا أميل. Sons of my mother, I chose other company than you. I have some nearer kin than you. Swift wolf, smooth-coated leopard, jackal with long hair. Here he says, ولدونكم أهلون سيد عملس وأرقة ذهلول وعرفة جيلو. So this is a very good example of the vagabond poetry represented by Lamiat al-Arab. So these were the Arab poets. With this, we'll be concluding this lecture. The following lecture would be related to the Arabic prose. Thank you.